All right. If you have your Bibles this morning, find Luke chapter 9, if you would, please. Luke in chapter number 9. I feel like after the music this morning, well, your hearts ought to be prepared to receive the Word. And been phenomenal this morning. Luke in chapter number 9, I want to bring a message this morning I've titled, Putting It All on the Table. I'm putting it all on the table. And I'm not a betting man. When I was about 10, 11 years old, I bet this boy 50 cents on a football game. And I lost, but I didn't have 50 cents. And he approached me and explained some things to me. And most of what he said he was going to do to me, I don't think it was physically possible, but I wasn't going to find out. And so I came up with 50 cents somehow and gave it to him and figured, okay, I don't think that gambling is going to be my line of work there in the future. Although my horse did finish ahead of Richard Talbot's horse yesterday. And that cost him some Krispy Kreme donuts this morning, which I have enjoyed already. So thank you, Brother Richard. And all, but anyway, putting it all on the table. There was a time in the Old West when people talked about betting the ranch. And that was a term that came about when men would play cards. And if someone was absolutely sure that they had a winning hand, if they knew that it was unbeatable, then there might be this big pot on the table. And that fellow would take out a piece of paper and he would literally sign over his ranch to cover the bet, to have it as collateral for the bet. And he was, in essence, committing everything he had. What he was doing was he's betting the ranch. Now, 2,000 years ago, Jesus challenged his disciples to pretty much do the same thing. No, not to play cards, but he challenged them to put everything they had on the table. Now, was it easy? No. Did Jesus try to coerce or his disciples under false pretenses? No. Jesus was clear. He was up front about what he expected of his disciples. Now, one of the things that I had to learn early on in my ministry was that Jesus is not looking for a bunch of decisions. We have a world today of people, well, I want to make my decision. Well, that's fine. But Jesus is looking for more than decisions. Jesus is looking for disciples. I'm afraid our churches today are filled with a lot of people who have, quote, made their decision, or they have made some sort of commitment, but they have never become true followers, true disciples of Jesus, and they have been moved through some emotional experience. The trouble is, they've never been changed. Now remember this about emotions. Your emotions are the shallowest part of your being. I can say something that will change your emotions like that. And you're going to be, well, we don't have chandeliers in here, but you're going to be swinging high, so to speak. You're going to be standing on the chairs. You're going to be shouting at joyous things and, shouting the victory 1 minute. And then the next minute, I can get up here and I can say something to make you mad, and you're ready. Well, you're ready to get up and walk out. What happened? Well, your emotions changed, didn't they? Our emotions are the shallowest part of our being. Our emotions can change like that. We have a world outside the church today who are looking on those of us inside the church, and I believe they see a lot of people in the church today who have been exposed to just enough religion that it's kept true biblical Christianity from ever taking hold in their life. They look at these people and they make the mistake, they believe that Christianity is something that's really nothing more than some watered-down version of something that people claim to be true. They think, well, if that is all Christianity is, then I really have better things to do. Jesus is not looking for weekend warriors, folks. We have far too many weekend warriors. Jesus doesn't put a whole lot of stock in people who come to church only when they don't have a better offer. There's a lot of phony faith that's out there today, and sadly, I'm afraid there's a lot of church attenders who have fooled themselves. The man who wrote the song, It Is Real. Remember that song? It is real, it's real, I know it's real, praise God. The doubts are settled. I know it's real. That man attended church 25 years faithfully before he ever got saved. Until finally one day he got it. The real thing. Jesus is looking for men and women who are committed to his cause. He's looking for men and women who are willing to put it all on the table. Now, as a pastor, as your pastor, to most of you, I want to demonstrate to you by more than just my words. But I want to demonstrate by my actions a willingness to do anything that needs to be done. See, I'm one of these people, I don't want to ask someone, I mean this, I don't want to ask someone to do something that I am myself unwilling to do. I want you to understand that in this ministry, I'm not going to stand up here and ask you to go all in. I'm not going to ask you to put it all on the table if I'm not willing to do the same myself. Now here in Luke chapter 9, Jesus presents to us one of the strangest challenges as it relates to the Christian life. And Jesus challenges his followers. And Jesus could do this because Jesus was himself willing to go above and beyond anything that he was asking of them. He left the glory of a sinless heaven. He came to a sinful earth. He left the right hand of his Father where he was exalted and praised and magnified. And he came to a ball of dirt where he knew he would be rejected and humiliated and hated. Jesus was not about to ask of his disciples anything that he was unwilling himself to go through and to endure. Jesus isn't some half-hearted Savior who's looking for a bunch of half-hearted followers. Jesus is looking for men and women who are willing to get out of bed every morning and say, Lord, I believe I've got the winning hand. Lord, today I'm willing to bet the ranch. Lord, today I am willing for you to put all of it on the table. And so understand the premise of my message this morning is simply this, and here's what I want you to get out of it. This is what I want you to take home. Jesus, who gave his all for us, he wants us to give our all for him. Again, Jesus has never asked anything of us that he himself was not willing to endure himself, to go through himself. And so beginning here in verse 23, Jesus is about to ask three things of his disciples. And I want to give you these three things. All three come right out of this one verse, and my outline this morning is very simple. Number one, this morning, Jesus is asking this of every one of us. He said, deny yourself. Deny yourself. I love the first two words that Jesus speaks in verse 23. Look at it. He says, if any. Now stop right there. If any. Now in the context of this is Luke's account of Matthew 16. You remember in Matthew 16, that's where Jesus asked his disciples, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they give all these answers. But then Jesus makes it personal. He says, okay, now you tell me, who do you say that I am? And so this is Luke's account of that same conversation. And in verse 20, look down in verse 20 here. Peter's the one who speaks up in verse 20. And notice what he says. He said unto them, but whom say ye that I am? Peter answering said, you're the Christ of God. You're the Messiah. Now, Peter oftentimes, unfortunately, would try to correct Jesus. You have to love Peter, because Peter may not always say the right thing, but Peter was always going to say something. I mean, when things weren't happening, when things weren't moving, you can expect things to get on board once Peter showed up. And oftentimes when Peter opened his mouth, it was usually just to change feet. But this is one of those times that old Pete gets it right. Who do you say that I am? Lord, you are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God. Good job, Pete. You got it right. In the same context of that conversation. Verse 23. If any man will come after me. Free will situation here. He doesn't say that all men shall follow me. But he says, if any man will. Free will. Now, I can tell anyone at any time, in any place, if you want to follow Jesus, you can follow Jesus. Doesn't matter what your past might have been, what baggage you feel like you're carrying. If you want to follow Jesus Christ, you can follow Jesus Christ. If you really want to be more than just someone who's had a conversion, but you want to truly be his disciple, then you can be his disciple. How do I know that? I know that because of what Jesus said. Jesus said, if any man will. Now, not everyone follows Jesus, but Jesus is willing to allow anyone to follow him. Now, in my ministry, today marks the 35th year of my ministry. 35 years today I've been in ministry. Now, that's well, go ahead and clap. Give me something here. Okay. Oh, thank you. I wasn't expecting that. But anyway. Now, as far as full-time, what we call full-time ministry, this is 35 years for me. And along the way, I'm one of these people. I'm kind of like Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison could tell you 700 ways how not to make a light bulb. And I feel like that's what it's been for me. I can tell you a lot of ways how not to do it. But believe it or not, there are some things that I have learned along the way. But in my ministry, I've never met people who could follow Jesus. I've met a lot of people who could follow Jesus and just wouldn't. But I've never met anybody who wanted to follow Jesus but couldn't. Pastor, why don't people follow Jesus? If Jesus really is who he claims to be, why wouldn't someone want to follow him? We'll keep reading in verse 23. Let's look at it. If any man will come after me, let him, here's a four-letter word. Let him deny himself. Whoa, time out. Here it is. This is where following Jesus is about to get messy. Here's where Jesus basically says there's only one person that can sit on the throne of your life. We talked about this last week. Two people cannot sit on one throne. There is going to be a cost in following me. There is going to be a cost to you in being my disciple. We can deny things. We can deny pleasures. We can deny other people. But it's another thing when it comes to talking about denying ourselves. Let's clarify something here. Denying self is not talking about self-denial, because we all practice self-denial in some form or another. Again, I use the illustration going to a restaurant. You have a meal. You eat the meal. At the end of the meal, would you like to have dessert? We've got some wonderful this, that, or other back. No, no, thank you. I don't want any of that. Now, you're not denying there's any dessert, but you're denying yourself. Why? Because you're on a diet, right? And so, what is a diet? It's a form of self-denial. Now, that's not what Jesus is talking about here, though. Denying self is where you put it all on the table. It's where you say, Lord, everything I am, everything I have, everything I aspire to be, I am putting it all on the table. I am surrendering it all to you. Now, here's the problem. We live in the wealthiest, most materialistic nation on earth. You know, 50% of the world's wealth is right here between our borders. We live in a nation where we don't have things. Things have us. We're living in a society that's constantly telling us what we deserve, what we are owed. Denying self cuts against the grain of everything that advertisers present us with today. Why? Because all these things we see, we deserve. Don't deny yourself of these things when they're so readily available. Don't deny yourself. Deify yourself. Admire yourself. Eulogize yourself. Do you know who the one member of Heritage Baptist Church is that I have the most problem with? I mean, look around, cast your vote, whatever. I can tell you who it is. Not a bad guy. Not a bad guy. I like him. He does get on my nerves from time to time. Everywhere I go, there he is. Can't get away from him. I wasn't going to name names there, Virginia. But I'm telling you, that guy I have the most problem with is who, class? Me. It's myself. And it's very easy for Darren Jackson to get in the way of things around here. And it's very easy, if I'm not careful, that I can so get in the way where Jesus is not seen. Now, before you get a little too pious, the same thing can be said of you, of all of us. Don't raise your hand. I'm not asking for a show of hands or anything of the sort, but if I were to ask you this morning, how many of you are willing to serve Jesus? How many of you are willing to obey Jesus? How many of you are willing to follow Jesus? I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of dishonest hands that would be raised. Why? Because we'd be embarrassed not to raise our hand. We'd be embarrassed not to say, I'll obey Jesus, I'll serve Jesus, I'll follow Jesus. We wouldn't want people to think that we're unwilling to do that. But how many of us in this sanctuary are honest enough to admit what we're really thinking is, you know, I'm going to serve Jesus. I'm going to obey Jesus. I'm going to follow Jesus as long as it doesn't cost me too much. As long as it doesn't take me too far. I'll do these things as long as I don't have to get out of my comfort zone. And Jesus said, that's not what I'm looking for. If you're going to follow me, if you're going to be my disciple, then you have to put me first. You have to put me above all others. You have to, as we, again, last week's message, seek ye first the kingdom of God. The kingdom, that means rule, the reign. Seek first my rule, my reign in your life. The first thing Jesus asked of his disciples, if you're going to put it all on the table, if you're truly convinced that through him you have the winning hand, then he says the first thing you have to do is you have to deny yourself. You have to do more than just the lip service, more than just talking the talk. You say, Lord, this morning, I'm all in. Deny yourself. Number 2, quickly here. Then it says here in verse 23, you have to die to self. Die to yourself. In verse 23, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself. Now it says, take up his cross daily. That doesn't translate very well to a 21st century American audience. The truth of the matter is, for us, there is something very casual about a cross. Because what do we do with a cross today? Here's what we do. We buff it. We shine it. We polish it. We make, we make jewelry out of it. We proudly display it. But back then, when this was spoken, you wouldn't dare do that. Why? Because people knew what a cross meant. A cross meant a torturous, agonizing, humiliating form of death. And so there is a shock factor to what Jesus is saying here in verse 23 when he says, take up your cross. We say today, amen. Back then, they say, no way. Not me. I know what a cross means. I've seen people on a cross. Now, I don't want anything to do with it. But here, Jesus says, take up a cross. Follow me. It'd be like Jesus saying to us, step up on a platform and put a noose around your neck. Walk into that room and sit in an electric chair. Place a bullseye over your heart and go stand against that wall. That's what Jesus was saying. A cross meant one thing. It meant death. And again, today we beautify the cross. We turn the cross into a piece of jewelry. You see, I know you see most all these conservative commentators, these ladies, conservative commentators on TV, and just about all of them, look at it, just about all of them wear crosses around their neck. Some of you in here today, you might have a cross around your neck. I'm not up here preaching against that, folks. I think today it has come to mean something entirely different. I'm just trying to put it in context. Today is an expression of our faith. And I think that is a good thing. I think it speaks volumes today. Again, though, in this context, in this day, it meant something totally different. It was a fearful thing. It would be like you wearing the skull and crossbones. Same thing. Jesus himself physically hung on a cross so we don't have to. Here he's speaking metaphorically. He's saying if you're going to be my disciple, then you better begin every morning with a funeral. Every morning you take your ego, your ambitions, your goals, your desires, you put them in the casket. You close the lid and you bury them. Before you think Jesus is asking too much, remember all that he is asking of us is what he himself has done. Look at verse 21. In verse 21, it says, and he straitly charged them and commanded them to tell no man that thing. What thing? That I am the Christ. I'm the Son of the living God. Verse 22, he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be slain and raised again the third day. Simply put, Jesus died for us. He is asking us to die with him. He's not asking us to die for him, but it's only when we die to self are we ever able to live for him. By the way, that's what he meant in verse 24. In verse 24, look at it. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it. But whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. Jesus said every day you have a choice to make as it relates to your life. You can use it for yourself. You can keep it on your own. You can do with your life whatever you will, or else you can give it to me. But he says if you use it for yourself, then remember this, eventually you're going to lose it. But if you give it to me, you're going to gain what can't be lost throughout eternity. In other words, the only way to keep it, that winning hand, the only way to keep it is by putting it all on the table. Putting it all in. Now, let's look at the third and final thing this morning. We need to deny ourselves. We need to die to self, and then finally, he goes on and reminds us to devote ourselves. We see that at the end of verse 23 here. If any man will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily. Now watch this. Follow me. Follow me. Well, I don't know all what I'm supposed to do, Lord. I don't know where all I'm supposed to go. Doesn't matter. What does he say? Just follow me. How many of you ever followed somebody because you didn't know where you were going? You ever done that? I've done it. I didn't know where I was going, so I'm going to follow them. Well, that's all Jesus asked. Follow me. That word follow is rather interesting because it doesn't simply mean, however, to follow behind somebody. It's actually a combination of two words. One word means way or path. It speaks of a way or a path. And the other means same. The word follow here literally means to walk in the same path. It means to walk in the same way. And the idea here is not so much that you follow behind. The idea is that you have chosen the same way. You have chosen to follow the same path. You have chosen now that you're going to walk in the same way. And when you do that, you give up all of your rights. And that's really the hard part. Jesus is saying the only way you can really follow me, the only way that you're really going to be my disciple is to surrender. And that's when most people check out. When you start talking about surrender to people, particularly in this day and time, then that's when they check out. Most people want just enough religion to get them to heaven, but not so much as to interfere with the life they want to live. See, this is the problem you have with a lot of young people. You know, I can't tell you the number of times I have parents come up to me and express a concern over their children. I can't tell you how many times parents who now have grown children who are gone, who want nothing to do with church whatsoever, how many of those conversations I've had with them, and they wonder what happened. Well, here's what happened in a lot of cases. You ever hear of an inoculation? Or as Barney would say, an inoculation? You get inoculated? But an inoculation, what is that? What is that? It's when, you get inoculated against something, they give you that shot, and that shot contains a little bit of the real thing. It contains a little bit of whatever it is you're trying to protect them against. And here's what happens in a lot of families. A lot of moms, a lot of dads, they bring their children to church just enough. They involve them just enough to give them a little bit, just a little exposure to it so that the real thing doesn't take hold. You know, there's a verse we quote all the time. This wasn't in my notes, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. There's a verse we quote all the time. And I know, well, I'll just give it to you. Raise up a child in the way they should go. And when they are old, they will not depart from it. Okay, and here's how we've heard that verse preached, and here's how we interpret it. You raise them up the right way that they ought to go, and then, there's maybe a time as they get older, they're going to go out in the world, and they're going to do their own thing, but there'll be a time when they'll come back to it. But you know what? That is not what that verse means. That verse is saying, when you are raising up a child in the way, on the path, on the road, following who they should follow the right way, even when they get old, even years down the road, they're not going to leave that path. They will not have left that path. They're going to stay on the path. Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to trip up from time to time. We've all done that. But it says, you raise them up in the way they ought to go, and even years down the road, they're still not going to have left that path. But too many people have been vaccinated with just enough to keep the real thing from taking hold in their life. Surrender, that's an unpopular word. You talk about surrender in our world today, and it speaks of a negative sense, negative connotation. But the implication is always whoever surrenders is the loser. You surrender, you lose. So we say today, never give up, never give in. Winning is everything. Second place means you're just the first loser. And that's what we're taught. Then Jesus comes along and he makes an amazing statement. He says the only way to victory in your Christian life is by surrendering. Douglas MacArthur said, he's the one who made that famous statement, in war, there is no substitute for victory. Jesus says that in life, there is no substitute for surrender. In the passage, Jesus says we win. The way we win is by losing. The way we get is by giving. Deny yourself. Die to self. Devote yourself. I love Jesus because Jesus is a bottom line preacher. He would be very unpopular in most Christian churches today. Now I got to wrap this up. Give me just a moment here and I'll be done. But let's just say, everyone here today, you live your average life expectancy. Now, for a man, that is 78 years. For a woman, it's a little bit longer. It's 81 years. There's probably a joke in there somewhere, but I'll move on here. But 78 years for a man, 81 years for a woman. Now, let me ask you a question. How much time have you got left? 5 years? 10 years? 20 years? 30 years? Some of you, you're feeling your pulse right now, aren't you? Why? Because you realize, hey, I'm on borrowed time. I'm on credit right now. But take whatever years you have left, if you just live an average life expectancy. Take whatever time God has given you, because you're kind of maybe in overtime right now, and remember this. You're going to do one of two things with that time you've got left. First of all, you're going to waste your life trying to hold on to it yourself. Or secondly, you're going to invest your life and you're going to surrender it to Jesus Christ. You're going to do one of those two things. Jim Elliot, that famous missionary, he said, he is no fool who gives what he cannot gain or cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Are you a follower of Jesus Christ? I mean, can you honestly say, you know what, I put it all on the table. When it comes to your church, let me ask you something. Are you all in? Is it all on the table? Do you serve your church? Do you pray for your church? Do you financially support your church? When it comes to your marriage, are you all in? When it comes to your money, Are you all in when it comes to your purity, young people? Are you all in? You ever hear of the Spanish explorer, Hernando Cortez? Cortez is the one who sailed from Spain to Mexico in 1519. He sailed from Spain to Mexico with a fleet of ships, and he had one assignment. His assignment was to establish a Spanish colony. And when Cortez reached Mexico, he did something very odd, very strange indeed. When they arrived on land, he ordered all the boats to be burned. Now, the soldiers could not believe what they were asking them to do. Burn all the boats? And Cortez, they said, never uttered another word until every boat in that small fleet had been burned. And at last, when Cortez spoke, here's what he said. He says, we will either win the victory or we will die trying, but we will not turn back. What's Jesus ask us to do? He says, burn the boats. Go all in. You take it all, and you put it all on the table. Because through me, you have the winning hand.
Amen.